Thank you, sir. Now we have before us a very, very renowned motivator who has trained number of youth throughout the nation in value orientation. Sri Pramod Kumar ji, on behalf of all of us, I welcome him and request him to address the gathering. Welcome you, sir.
My humble pranams to the lotus feet of Swami Vivekananda, Pujya Swamijis of the Ramakrishna order, chairperson of this session, Shri A.K. Khan, and dear friends. Standing in front of this massive gathering of 7,000 people and largely made up of students, I am reminded of a beautiful incident which happens several times, in fact, in the life of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the guru of Swami Vivekananda. It is said that when he was traveling in Bengal, touring through the villages of Bengal, and he would do Nama Sankirtana, chanting the names of God, and he would dance to that Sankirtana, large groups of people would gather around him and dance along with him. And often Sri Ramakrishna, when he would see such a large gathering of human beings in front of him, he would go into ecstasy. Because through these people, he would see the cosmic form of God, the Vishwarupa of God. Such a Vishwarupa is right in front of us today. All this gathering, you represent an infinite field of possibilities for me. Each and every one of you, what will you be perhaps 5 years or 10 years or 15 years from now? It represents a massive field of possibilities. In fact, the whole world today is hailing India as the youngest nation on earth. They call it, the thinkers, the experts, the pundits are calling it as demographic dividend. That India has the highest, the biggest advantage in terms of this demographic dividend because more than 65% of Indian population today is below the age of 35. So we have a massive population of youth in this country with great potential, with that infinite field of possibilities in front of them. And what they require is just a spark of inspiration. What we require is a direction, as many of the speakers have expressed again and again. As Swami Gnanadananji said, he expressed his concern that if this large population of youth gets riddled, gets bogged down with addictions, with distractions, with problems, then this demographic dividend, instead of becoming an advantage, it will become a disadvantage for us. It will become a nuisance for us. In fact, already we see such large-scale problems coming up amongst the youth. But to our rescue is the message of Swami Vivekananda, is his life, is his inspiration in front of us. Today, within the limited time that is available to me, I would like to dwell upon one particular question which is, I feel, important, which in fact Swami Bodhamayananji raised during his talk. He said in 1985, the government of India woke up and declared that the birthday of Swami Vivekananda should be celebrated as National Youth Day. So that question as to what is so special about his message and his life, why is it that he alone is the apt youth icon, perhaps the real youth hero for the Indian youth? On this question, I would like to spend a few minutes. And at the very outset, I'd like to present in front of you the life of this young man from Maharashtra. Think of him, he joined the Indian army, fought a war against Pakistan, the 1971 war, which is still today celebrated as Vijay Divas because of our victory against Pakistan. During this war, his regiment came under fire from Pakistani artillery. And all his friends in the regiment, his colleagues in the regiment died during that firing. And this young man alone was left alive. He was injured. One of the bullets hit him on the forehead and ricocheted off. But he survived. And this incident deeply disturbed him to the core because he was asking that question repeatedly to himself. Why did God keep me alive when all my friends have perished in this incident? This question depressed him so much that he became, in fact, suicidal at a point of time. Nobody was willing to answer this crisis in his life. And it is said that one day he went to the railway station to give up his life, to lie down in front of the railway tracks to allow the train to pass over him. And the irony of life was such that God did not want him to die so early. And then the train was delayed by 3 hours. He went to the platform, picked up a small book. He was looking at a bookstall. His eye fell on a small booklet of Swami Vivekananda. It is still printed today. It is available here at the bookstall today. It is called Vivekananda, His Call to the Nation. He picked up this book, started reading, And he says he was so inspired, he started finding answers to those disturbing questions which were plaguing him. His depression vanished, his suicidal tendency vanished, and he said, from this day onwards, I will dedicate my life to the service of my people. And this young man who went there to give up his life, went back to his village in Maharashtra called Ralegaon Siddhi. Today he is called as Anna Hazare. So think of this, my dear friends. 150 years after Swami Vivekananda's life, after his, perhaps he is not in physical form today, but his message continues to transform young people. Swami Vivekananda himself would say that the greatest miracle on earth is the transformation of the human mind. The greatest miracle on earth is the transformation of human character. And look at how Vivekananda touched the lives of thousands and lakhs of people. A chance interaction turns people into begins to realize their great potential. Let me touch upon a few more lives like this, going back perhaps into time. The same thing, the same story you will notice. In fact, I am reminded of the statement of a prediction made by one of the most respected monks of the Ramakrishna order, who was here in Hyderabad, who was one of the former presidents of this ashrama, Swami Ranganathananda. Ranganathananji used to say that even if 10% of India's population reads Vivekananda, there will be a political revolution in this country. And in fact, his prediction is coming to be realized today. That is what we see in this huge public upsurge against corruption. Not only Anna Hazare, whether it is Kiran Bedi, whether it is any of these icons of the anti-corruption movement that you see today, all of them are in some way or the other inspired, touched by the message of Swami Vivekananda. And the same happened perhaps during the freedom movement. You read the lives of some of the greatest freedom fighters. I was reading the life of Tilak, and there is this interaction, a chance interaction between him and Swamiji. Both of them are traveling on the same train, and the group of young men who were traveling with Swami Vivekananda, they introduce him to Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and they say he's a great sannyasi. Those days, in fact, Swamiji was not known by the name of Vivekananda. He would sign his letters by the name of Sachidananda. The name Vivekananda was popularized later. And it is said that Swamiji went and stayed with Bal Gangadhar Tilak for nearly 15 days in Pune. And there was extensive discussion between them on all kinds of topics, on the politics of the time, and also on the Bhagavad Gita. And you see the transformation that he did on Tilak. The Tilak became one of the leading nationalists of the Indian freedom movement. And his influence on Tilak's attitudes or philosophy, he wrote the Gita Rahasya. Tilak's Gita Rahasya, as you know, is one of the most famous commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita today, where he emphasizes on the Karma Yoga aspect of the Bhagavad Gita. And it is the same thing that we find in Swami Vivekananda's message to the youth. When he would talk about the Bhagavad Gita in his essays on the Gita, he would say the Gita is not for escapists, it is not for weak people, it is not for running away from life, it is for people who are in this battlefield of life, in the Kurukshetra of life. And it is the same message which we find reflected in Tilak's views, in Tilak's attitudes, and in Tilak's, Bal Gangadhar Tilak's actions during the nationalist movement. Recently, you'll be surprised to know that the West Bengal government, the intelligence wing of the West Bengal government, published the secret reports of the British intelligence officers, the spies, the British spies, who were gathering information about the nationalists, whom they called as extremists, whom they also called as sometimes as terrorists, because they were working against the British Empire. And this report was kept classified till recently. It was published recently. You will be amazed to see this report by one such British officer called Taggart, where he refers to the influence that Swami Vivekananda had on all these freedom fighters. Reports from Chennai, reports from down south, reports from the north indicate that wherever these freedom fighters would gather, their password would be Vivekananda. If they wanted to know whether they are all part of the same sect, in order to recognize each other, the password was Vivekananda. The lessons for these freedom fighters were the lectures of Swamiji. All his lectures were taught to these freedom fighters to inspire them to join the freedom struggle. So whether it is Anna Hazare today, whether it was Bal Gangadhar Tilak, whether it was Subhash Chandra Bose, whether it was Gandhiji, we see this influence so widely prevalent across the length and breadth of this land. But of course, I would be doing a great injustice if I confine myself to Vivekananda's influence on politics alone. You take any other field, I can point out a great figure in that particular field who has been touched by the message of Vivekananda. already there has been mention made of Jamshedji Tata. When I traveled to Bangalore to the Indian Institute of Science to participate in a conference there, I was happy to see that the Indian Institute of Science during their annual day when they were celebrating their centenary, they brought out a souvenir. In the introduction to this souvenir is a beautiful record, a detailed description of this chance interaction again between Jamshedji Tata and Swami Vivekananda. Both met on a ship during a voyage. And Vivekananda impresses on Jamshedji Tata that the need of the hour is to start a world-class institute of scientific research in India. And Jamshedji Tata, when he came back to India, he established the Indian Institute of Science, which has been adorned by great scientists like Satish Dhawan, who played the role of the director of the Indian Institute of Science. Or you go to America, during his days in America where he was lecturing, he happened to meet a great scientist called Nicholas Tesla. And in one of his letters back to India, there is an amazing, again, mind-boggling mention of his discussion with Nicholas Tesla. He says, Swamiji says, I had a discussion with Nicholas Tesla and I convinced him that force and matter are interconvertible. He says force and matter are interconvertible, and I convinced Tesla to make a mathematical equation out of it. I want him to express this in mathematical form. But Tesla could not do it. 30 years later, it was Albert Einstein who expressed that idea of Swamiji in E equal to mc square. So this is the brilliance of the monk. A monk, he could touch upon the deepest problems of science because his understanding of the universe was so deep that whichever field he touched, he would revolutionize it. If it was Bengali literature or if it was English literature, there are professors who have done their PhDs on Vivekananda's impact on English literature, or whether it is politics, whether it is society, wherever he would go, he would transform people. One such businessman he transformed in America was a young entrepreneur called Rockefeller. Even today there is this Rockefeller Foundation, which is famous for funding research. In fact, in the early 19th century, the Rockefeller Foundation funded much of the biological and medical research in America. And as a young man, this Rockefeller interacted. There was a chance interaction between them. There is a beautiful description of how he encounters Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda, Swamiji, in fact, tells him that when I go back to India, I want to start an organization in the name of my Guru so that his message can be spread. So why don't you help me in this cause? And it is said that Rockefeller pulled out a check, signed it, and threw this blank check where Swamiji was sitting on the table, and he said, here it is. He was very arrogant. He thought he was doing a great service to Swamiji by giving that check. Swamiji looked up at him and smiled, and he said, my dear Rockefeller, it is you who should be grateful to me, for I am giving you this opportunity to do this service. And Rockefeller said, why? Why should I be grateful? I am the giver, you are the taker. Why should I be grateful? And then Rockefeller realized that a little later, several years later in his life, in his early 40s, Rockefeller was struck with all the imaginable diseases of the world. Blood pressures and diabetes and cancers and God knows what. Because of the fast life that he had led, he became very successful economically, but he was a cutthroat businessman, he was a cutthroat entrepreneur. He eliminated every competition that came his way, and nature struck him down with almost every possible imaginable disease. And he was almost on his deathbed when this realization came to him. He started thinking about the purpose of his own life, what he had done with his life. And when he woke up, he recovered miraculously from that disease. From being simply a cutthroat entrepreneur and a businessman, he became a philanthropist. He established this Rockefeller Foundation, which gave millions of dollars to excellent medical research, which went on to develop many vaccines, which have cured many major diseases and epidemics of the world. So this is how Rockefeller has been touched by the message of Swami Vivekananda. I can give you any number of incidents like this. The previous speaker, Swami Anupamananji, talked about Babar Ali. Yesterday I was hearing Babar Ali's talk on a forum called Ink Talks. This young man who is being celebrated as the youngest principal of the world today, he could not speak in English till a few months ago. And then he trained himself through his students. He started learning English. And then he comes on the platform and he says, this is my first lecture in English. And in his broken English, you should see the spirit of the man. He says, I read Swami Vivekananda. I have reflected upon his teachings. And this is what gave me the inspiration to do what I am doing. That when I saw all these young children without opportunities for education, I felt that I should, start teaching them. I should create, a forum or a school where these young children can start learning. So this is how Swamiji's message goes from, nooks and corners of the world. We do not know how it reaches which corner of the world. In fact, that was the point, one of the points that I wanted to make today, That why is it that we are calling it National Youth Day? It is not just that his message is confined to Indian youth alone. We should start calling it as the International Youth Day. Let's go to the United Nations, represent it, and say Vivekananda's message is universal. Let's call it as the World Youth Day. Why only as the National Youth Day? And I was fortunate enough, in fact, I was one of those young men having been touched by this message. I encountered that same book called His Call to the Nation, which Anna Hazare encountered during my days at IIT Madras when I was doing my mechanical engineering there. There was a small Marathi mandal which used to organize essay competitions during their Vinayak Chaturthi celebrations. And I happened to win a prize in the essay competition. They gave me this small booklet called Vivekananda, His Call to the Nation. I was a very shy young man. Standing in front of even the school assembly, I would shiver. Today, Vivekananda Swamiji has given me the strength to stand in front of a crowd of 7,000 and talk to you and address you with confidence. That is what Swamiji can do to young people like you and me. And you'll be amazed to know that Vivekananda study circle, which we started in IIT Madras 15 years ago, is today functioning. It has become much stronger today. On CNN IBN, this year there has been a series of programs called Yuva. I don't know how many of you have been watching it. It was done with the support of the Coimbatore Center of the Ramakrishna Mission. And they were having a series of panel discussions with various eminent scientists and people from different walks of life. One of the persons who came in the panel discussion was Dr. Y.S. Rajan, who's a very eminent scientist in India, a very close aide of Dr. Abdul Kalam. And during this discussion, suddenly he pulled out an annual report which was published by this Vivekananda Study Circle at IIT Madras. And he told the audience on CNN IBN, he said, if you want to see the kind of impact that Vivekananda can have on students, you go to IIT Madras, here is the annual report of the Vivekananda Study Circle. And he was brandishing this report. I feel proud that I was one of the founder members of that Vivekananda Study Circle at IIT Madras. You can visit the study circle there, see the impact that it is having on the cream of India, on the brilliant minds of this country, where the students are riddled with the same problems that we have been discussing today. The LAN, for example, at IIT Madras, the local area network, became a nuisance in the campus because it would be on 24 hours, and IIT started experiencing a very peculiar problem that the attendance in the classes was dropping. Every day the attendance was going down because the students would wake up till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the early hours of the morning playing video games, playing computer games on the LAN. It went to such an extent that IIT had to shut down the LAN from midnight, 12 o'clock. They issued a circular that beyond 12 o'clock, the local area network will not be available. Drug abuse. You go to National Institute of Technology at Trichy. My friends there are telling me that ganja is sold in the hostels openly. There are gunny bags of ganja kept and sold. Nobody is to, question. Nobody can do anything. This is the situation. These are the problems that young people are facing today. And as Swami Bodhamayananji was saying, enough of admiration and enough of adoration we have done. Can we apply Swamiji's message to these problems? Can you take up these problems and try and go and solve them in the society? Tomorrow, let's say you go to UK. Look at what has been happening in UK in the last 2 weeks. That young man called Anuj Bidya has been murdered. And what have we done? We have set up a memorial fund in the name of Anuj Bidya. If Swamiji had been here today, what would be his message? Swamiji was so full of strength, who was so full of patriotism, who would, on that British ship, that incident, when he saw 2 Britishers criticizing India, he lifted one of them physically, and he said, how dare you criticize my mother? If you criticize Mother India, I will throw you into the ocean. That was the spirit of Swamiji. And what have we become in contrast today? Where are we today? Okay. Can we solve this problem of racial discrimination against the Indian students in UK? And even as this memorial fund in the name of Anuj Bidya is being set up, yet another young man has been murdered there. So we have become so weak. Physical strength is still the grossest expression of strength that you can think of. But even in this grossest expression of strength, we have become weak today. We cannot stand up to even a small problem like racial discrimination. We go to Australia, get beaten up like vegetables. Nearly 2,000 students have been attacked in cases of racial discrimination. And there is no response from this community coming. There is no spirit from us. When are we going to wake up? When are we going to stand up to these problems, own up these problems, and solve these problems with spine? That is where Swami Vivekananda's message is very much relevant today. Nobody can say that his message is only for those who are interested in spirituality. Nobody can say that his message is only for those who are interested in religion. His message touches upon each and every aspect of our lives. His message cuts across all barriers of religion, caste, sect, etc. And therefore, he is the youth icon of India. So these were a few thoughts I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm sure that many more young men will be inspired by his message in the years to come. Namaste.